Good morning once again, distinguished guests, esteemed faculty members, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor and a sense of responsibility that I welcome all of you to this important gathering and the pivotal collaboration between the Caribbean and Africa region. Today we have come together not as just representatives of our various regions, but stewards of our planet. And it's important that we have these important discussions. As a faculty, we organize such programs to educate ourselves, to also know some recent development in major areas. And that is why we are here today. We are doing this with a very important university. For Africa and Caribbean, we have some commonalities. I don't know how many of us have been to the Caribbean before. We have rich history. Things that are affecting all of us are common. The rising sea levels, drought affecting our agricultural lands, and major other things that we share in common. It is as a result of these commonalities that will form the bedrock for our discussions today. As we embark on this journey, I want us to understand that issues that are affecting our country are not just politics, but climate-related matters. And today we are going to do justice to climate-related issues, and that's why we are here this morning. I must extend my appreciation to the team that put this program together. I had a call from Dr. Boache, who said, I had a call from a very good friend of mine, of his, from Caribbean, and we decided to put this together. So, Dr. Boache, thank you very much for leading us into these whole discussions, and we do appreciate your support. So this is what we are going to organize this morning, to have these discussions, and I'll urge our students to pay particular attention to what we are going to discuss, ask questions. We have a very good professor who is here to help us understand climate justice and then collaboration between these regions, so that together we can turn the tides and then we achieve a climate issues. But one thing we need not to forget before we leave here, we are not only finding reasons or solutions to our environmental issues, but the important thing is that those solutions must be just, and those solutions must also sit with us. Because two of us, we have profound, rich cultural experience that we have to share together. On that note, I want to ask the MC to take over, and then we move on with our program for this morning. Thank you very much.
All right, so we have a lot in common. And then today it's about climate justice. And I want to support what my dean has just said with a document that was published by Canadi in October 2023. And they mentioned that with 70% of the Caribbean population living and working in coastal areas, where most of the infrastructure is located, Climate change poses real threats to their communities, economic sectors, and natural ecosystems. Impacts are already being felt through coastal erosion due to sea level rise, coral bleaching, and marine ecosystem damage with higher sea surface temperature and other things. Then the World Bank Group also have a document on Ghana that estimates that at least 1 million more people could fall in poverty due to climate shocks if urgent climate actions are not taken. Income could reduce by up to 40% for poor households by 2050. Then the analysis calls for pursuing a development pathway that builds resilience to climate change. This, to quotation, is enough reason for us here in Africa, and in particular Ghana, to collaborate with the Caribbean to find a common solution to this problem, which I may refer to as an enemy. And there is a need for all of us to listen very well and to contribute to make it work. We have a guest who is very much qualified to talk to us concerning this climate justice. I do not know him much, but I'll call upon someone who knows everything about him. But I know that he is someone who extensively worked in the field of environment. He has also written a number of books. Notable among is Protection of the Environment and the Role of United Nations, A Tale of Bureaucratic Wastefulness. I also know that he put up a book on developing world and the environment, making the case for effective protection of the global environment. This and many other bills that he championed back in the Caribbean, and he is here to share that with us. Without much, I invite Dr. Boakye to introduce our guest to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing a greater part of my work of introducing my friend here to talk to us. I stand on the existing protocols already established, and I want to tell you something briefly about Professor Rajendra Ramlogan. And Professor Rajendra Ramlogan is a professor in commercial and environmental law at the University of the West Indies. Professor Ramlogan obtained a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of the West Indies. During his Bachelor of Law studies, Professor Ramlogan received numerous awards, including the Barbados Bar Association Prize, Top Final Year Law Student, the Molly Reed Prize, First Place, Law of Real Property, nominee for the All Campuses Students of the Year Award, Faculty Prize, Top Second Year Law Student, and the Law Society of the University of the West Indies Award for Academic Excellence. Professor Ramlogan graduated with a Master of Laws in International Legal Studies from the New York University School of Law as a recipient of the Southern Basin Consortium Scholarship, LLM, New York University School of Law. Professor Ramlogan proceeded to the University of Cambridge, where he received the Cambridge Commonwealth Trust and Overseas Research Student Awards. He graduated with a doctorate in international environmental law from the University of Cambridge and is now a fellow of the Cambridge Commonwealth Society. Before his university career, Professor Ramlogan worked in the local oil industry and also enjoyed a stint as a foreign associate at the highly prestigious Washington, D.C. law firm Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, now Wilmer Halley. Professor Ramlogan has published 14 books and numerous articles covering subjects such as business law, commercial law, judicial review, sustainable development, international environmental law, national environmental legal system, that is Trinidad and Tobago, Cuba, environmental health, environmental refugees, international environmental crimes, development and environment, developmental democracy, human rights in Japan, international security, environmental management and hydrocarbon sector, and energy joint venture. According to the World Catalog, his book, Sustainable Development Towards a Judicial Interpretation, is logged in 139 libraries worldwide, with another publication, The Developing World and the Environment, making the case for effective protection of the global environment in 124. ResearchGate credit Professor Ramlogan with having 1,704 of his publications read, with 148 citations. Google Scholar indicated that there are 331 citations pertinent to his work, with 7 being H-index and 6 being I-10 index. We have a unique opportunity to hear from a man who has traveled about 35 countries and still counting, and he's touring Africa. And I know from here he's going to Nairobi, Kenya, and from Kenya he's going to South Africa, and probably to Eastern Europe, and going back to Trinidad. And he tells me that when he retires, he's planning retiring, and there are 3 countries he's considering. And on top of it is Ghana, and specifically he wants to settle in my hometown, which you were there last 2 days. I mean, he has gone around the country, and he's fascinated about what he has seen in Ghana and beyond. And I think the Ghanaian culture, in a way, has had a good impression. He said he came in contact with the Ghanaian culture in 1980, which I think many of us, or some of us, were not born at the time. And he has told me a great deal about even books about Ghana I have not read. He treasures knowledge, and he invests so much. He will pay every dime to get a certain level of knowledge. And ladies and gentlemen, I have this unique opportunity and privilege to present to you Professor Rajendra Ramlogan. Shall we receive him with a round of applause?
I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I never thought I'd be nervous, but I'm actually nervous. I do hope it's the first and last time I'll be wearing a long sleeve shirt on this trip to Accra. I don't quite like dressing with long sleeve shirts anymore. Thank you all for the welcome. Faculty members, all of you are here. I tend not to stand at the same spot, so forgive me. I move around a lot. So, I know some of you would be accounting students. I will try to speak. People say Trinidadians speak with a sing-song accent. Does it sound sing-song? No? Sing-song? It doesn't sound like I'm singing? It's okay? I can sing if you want. Okay. Climate change, as mentioned, is a major issue touching the world, especially developing countries. And, it's not an issue for law, for accountants, for literature students. It's an issue for all of us. The words there was echoed by someone in Bangladesh in 2002. People with the smallest carbon footprints are suffering the most. The victims are living in mud homes with hardly any resources. They have contributed virtually nothing to climate change. And the mention was made of Ghana and a study that showed the vulnerable, how they will be affected. These people do not burn fossil fuels. These people are not the ones who are causing climate change. And those with money, with all due respect, even the professors, may choose to live more inland. They could afford homes on mountain tops. They could afford the food. They could afford many things. But the vulnerability will touch all of us because the price will have to be paid, especially by young people. As mentioned, I'm going across to Nairobi tomorrow night, starting my journey to Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zambia, Namibia, right? Making my way down backpacking. And I read about the riots in Nairobi. And when I looked at some of the Facebook pictures, it was mainly young people. Young people who were protesting a decision by the government to raise taxes. Young people who are standing up and saying enough is enough. This morning when I read the headline, the taxes were withdrawn. Well, this may have been in that case a successful outcome, but we don't know if it will always be as successful. So what is climate change? Basically, climate change is the world is getting hotter. When you burn fossil fuels, you release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The carbon dioxide rises and stays above the earth like a sheet. So when the sun rays come down and hit the earth's surface, it traps the heat between the earth and that curtain, and the world is getting warmer. It's as simple as that. To remove carbon dioxide, we need to use less fossil fuels, but forests, green, bushes, they absorb the carbon dioxide. They're what you call a sink for carbon dioxide. And the irony of it, a continent like Africa is more a sink. They do more to remove carbon dioxide from the world than anywhere else. And they are not one of the major producers of greenhouse gases. So you are providing a benefit to humanity, but carrying a disproportionate burden on behalf of humanity. That is the question. So I will move forward. So there's this debate about climate change. Some people say it ain't happening. It's all in your imagination, especially people who are paid by the oil companies. It's your imagination, right? The world is not getting warmer. Do you all find Accra is warmer? I mean, I'm 62. I'm an old man. And I even feel Trinidad is warmer now than when I was a boy growing up. When I was a boy growing up, I could go out into the road and play all day in the hot sun. If I go outside in Trinidad for half an hour, I put on a hat. It's not just age. It is hotter. It feels hotter. So let's look at our vulnerability. Some have been said. Hurricanes. Hurricanes are really our major problems in the Caribbean. And hurricanes have been increasing and increasing in numbers. This year alone, it is possible we will have 24 hurricanes in the Caribbean. Record number. 24. In only 12 hours, there was a hurricane in 2017 that went from Category 2 to Category 5. When the storm made landfall in Dominica, 175 miles per hour winds hit that country. You had 12 hours to prepare for that hurricane. What was thought to be a Category 2, which is a mild hurricane, in 12 hours turned 5. The most ferocious hurricane you could ever experience. Dominica was completely smashed. Everything destroyed. The Dominicans had to go to different countries. Young people had to come to Trinidad to go to school. It took about 6 months for people to start to return home. That is climate change in the Caribbean. And what is interesting is to hear the Prime Minister of Dominica And this is what he said. To deny climate change is to procrastinate while the earth sinks. It is to deny a truth we have just lived. It is to mock thousands of my compatriots who in a few hours, without a roof over their heads, will watch the night descend on Dominica in fear of sudden mudslides and what the next hurricane may bring. My fellow leaders, there's no more time for conversation. There is little time left for action. While the big countries talk, the small island nations suffer. We need action and we need it now. He's begging, he's pleading. Notice this is at the United Nations General Assembly. For those of you aware of what takes place in the United Nations, this is more or less a talk shop. By this time, the President of America had already left the General Assembly meeting. That's the respect you have. It's the small countries that remain and talk, while the large ones, they leave. That's the reality. Bahamas, terrible. And what happened in Bahamas was unusual. Never before experienced. This hurricane came. A hurricane, if you can think about it, it will go, it's moving. When this hurricane reached Bahamas, it parked. It stopped and just started to pour everything downwards. It never happened before. A hurricane stall, shut down. Like I almost shut down yesterday coming from Cape Coast, right? The car started to overheat and it had to be stopped and so on, right? This hurricane stopped, stayed right here. Never happened before. This is what climate change is about. And this is what he says now. Small island countries around the world, we are on the front lines of being swallowed into an abyss created initially by human activity and increasingly by inaction. So we created it, but we are doing nothing about it. And that is where we are here today, to decide if today perhaps is a platform for all of us to decide, maybe under the leadership of the universities, we should start some action and move from inaction. Look at Africa. State of the Climate in Africa 2022 report. This is Africa. Africa, like other regions, has come to terms with the reality that climate change is already happening. Given Africa's high exposure, fragility, and low adaptive capacity, the effects of climate change are expected to be more severely felt. People's health, peace, prosperity, infrastructure are exposed. This is Africa. This is your continent. This is part of our world. This is what is to be expected. You know, when things go wrong, I don't want to be, the word I would use in Trinidad is corny, but when things fall apart, and you all may know the phrase from Chinua Achebe, when things fall apart, like currently in Venezuela, the political system has fallen apart. My country has 1 million people. We currently have 300,000 refugees in Trinidad that we are struggling to deal with. Venezuelans who have fled by boat to Trinidad, which is the nearest country to South America. What happens? Like, for example, in Nigeria, they have had problems with governance. Are you not seeing refugees in Ghana? Are you not seeing it? I heard about it from the drivers, that you're getting a lot of refugees here. What happens when climate makes a place impossible to live? Where would people go? Where would the million of people living on the coastal areas of Ghana with rising sea level, where would they go? Would they not come inland? Would they not join the multitudes of people living inside there? Or do you expect them to stay there and drown or live in poverty? This is what it does. There will be movement of people. More than 110 million people on the continent were directly affected by weather, climate, and water-related hazards in 2022, causing more than 8.5 billion in economic damages. That is your State of Africa report. I reported 5,000 fatalities, of which 48% were associated with drought and 43% were associated with flooding. Those are large numbers, you know. And this is just the start of what is going to take place. I am not making these numbers up. These are numbers that are generated by research done here. Heat waves, heavy rains, floods, tropical cyclones, and prolonged droughts are having devastating impacts on communities and economies. So we in the Caribbean, we contribute 1% to greenhouse gases. 1. Africa, less than 10. And I'll tell you this, if you take South Africa out of this, it probably is about 6 or 7%. South Africa is a very large, fairly large producer of greenhouse gases because a lot of their electricity comes from coal-powered plants. So you're cutting down trees, which is a sink, and you are also putting a fossil fuel into the environment. So you think about this now, we are less than 1%, you are less than 10%, you have contributed to this thing called climate change. A 2020 study found that climate change damages in the Caribbean are projected to increase from 5% of GDP to 20%. By the year 2100, we would lose 20% of our GDP because of climate change. Look at in Africa. On a high warming scenario, Eastern and Western Africa would experience a reduction in GDP per capita by about 15% by 2050. You know what this is saying? You are going to get poorer. Look, in 2050, my descendants may have forgotten me. I will no longer be mourned. But you, I'm looking at these young faces here. Some of you are going to be in your 50s. You're going to be in this world, living in a society. Don't think, I'm not here to scare you necessarily, though. I'm just here to tell you that you must never, you have the opportunity to do something. That's why you should not be scared. So it's a call for action, not a call to tremble. Right? You are going to lose, it is said, Northern and South Africa would approach 10% by 2050, while Central Africa 5%. Eastern and Western Africa, 15% of GDP loss. So, you're going to have a real problem there. The loss gap between the low and high warming nation widens. By 2050, losses in the high warming scenarios ranges from 50%. So there are parts of Africa where GDP would be lost by as much as 50%, and in some areas, 85%. You know what you're saying? Where do you think those people are going? If you have lost your gross domestic product, you have lost the money that you are making as an economy, where are these people going? If you remove 85% of the income available in Accra, how are you going to live? Think about that. I must say I'm grateful for, I look at the cost of taxis, and to come here is 20 US, and to use boot is 20 Ghanaian dollars. It's a big difference, right? So we may all have to use boot forever. That's reality. If you lose all the money, you can't take taxi. You have to take boot and Uber. So, climate justice, really and truly, is simply about figuring out who should pay, who should bear the burden of paying for what is happening to us. That's what climate justice is about. And therefore, you have legal groups that are approaching the struggle to get justice for those who are suffering. There are two things that has to happen. Two things. The first is called mitigation. Mitigation is really when you stop producing greenhouse gases. You stop. You reduce the amount. That's called mitigation. The second thing is called adaptation. It's here. My students, I know this has been recorded. Sometimes I really say things I should not say. And my students get upset with me. I hope I don't offend you because I will be myself for 10 seconds. You know, if you are a student, you don't want to get pregnant, there are things you do. There are contraceptives. That is mitigation. You prevent it before it happens. Adaptation is when the child born, you learn to deal with it. Correct? The child is now the reality. The child can't go back. So now you have to deal with the future of that child. Adaptation. Simple. But it is too late to take contraceptives because the climate change is here. You are pregnant already. Abortion is not an option. It doesn't change nothing. The morning after pill makes no sense. My students taught me about that, by the way. They mentioned that in class when I was giving this example. They say, sir, there's the morning after pill. I said, what? Morning after? Okay, I will not go into that. So, there are groups around the world, including in Africa and the Caribbean, where we are trying to deal with climate justice. But more and more, I believe we are wrong in what we are doing. We are wrong because we are fighting, but we are fighting how the developed countries want us to fight. We are doing what they want us to do. They have set out the rules of this war. And I who was part of that fight, I believe I will not join that fight anymore. Because I don't believe it is the correct fight. And I'll tell you, this is the whole essence of what I'm going to say today. But I will share with you what I think that fight, the fight that I fought and many others are fighting, both on the continent and the Caribbean. The number of climate change cases have moved from 884 to 2,180. Look at the injustice. It sounds good. So let's look at mitigation. So this is where you are attempting to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases. They came up with something called the Paris Accord on climate change, where countries agreed that they would limit their greenhouse gas emissions. We will no longer do this bad thing that we are doing. But you know what? Look at Germany. In Germany, the German government was sued successfully because they were doing something that would raise greenhouse gas emissions rather than reduce it in line with what they had promised to do. So that's in Germany. It happened here in South Africa. Earth Live Johannesburg. And this is what the judge said. I accept that the decision to grant the authorization without proper prior consideration of the climate change impacts is prejudicial. Permission was granted to build a coal-fired power plant which will emit substantial greenhouse gases in an ecologically vulnerable area. Okay, so in South Africa, this looks good. They have stopped a coal-powered plant that would have added greenhouse gases. But you ever stop to think? It also meant that people living in this area may not have access to proper supply of electricity. So you stop it. So think about you living in a part of Ghana where you have electrical issues, where the electricity is not reliable. And someone comes along and says, you know what, we'll build a plant. We have found coal in this area. So we're going to build a coal-powered plant and you'll have electricity 24 hours a day, reliable. How many of you would want that? Let's be truthful. Don't be afraid. You can raise your hand or you could say, no, you are prepared to live in darkness, in inconsistent Wi-Fi. All the young people could live without Wi-Fi 24 hours. Even an old man like me struggling with my Wi-Fi right now. You know, I'm calling to Trinidad on WhatsApp and, you know, its communication is poor, etc., etc. Would you be willing to make that sacrifice? Any one of you? You're in the front. And I have a habit of picking on my students too. You will make that sacrifice? No? You want electricity. You will take 24 hours electricity. And you're honest enough to say that. How many people are prepared to say that we will be prepared to live under inconsistent electrical supply to save the environment? You know, it's easy, and I don't mean to be racist, but it is easy for for people in the developed world, Norway, Finland, and these places to say that you all should not have more greenhouse. It's easy. They don't have the problems we have. If electricity goes for 15 minutes, it's a catastrophe. You ever watch in America when a tornado hits and tear down all the power lines and everything? Within 48 hours, they have electricity. We can do that? Impossible. So I can keep going ahead here. Especially in South Africa, they have been successful in saying that if you are going to engage in projects that will emit greenhouse gases, you have to consider the impact of that in terms of mitigation and the limits that you are supposed to be doing. Again, all these cases are South Africa, basically, drilling and everything like that. Kenya was an interesting one, right? And the appellant criticism against the proposed project, it is in breach of Kenya's obligations under the Paris Agreement. And again, the courts in Kenya seem to have agreed and said that when you're assessing a project, you should think about mitigation. In the Caribbean, and this is a case, this is the first and only case in the Caribbean. Now picture this. African leaders recently named a Caribbean leader as a leader of the year. His name is Dr. Ifran Ali. He's the Prime Minister of Guyana. And he was honored by African leaders. Why is that? So let me tell you about Guyana. And I know I have a time limit, right? So I will really move faster. But I need to tell you about Guyana. Guyana was one of the poorest places in the Caribbean. It is actually in South America, but we considered it Caribbean because the British colonized it. It has more Guyanese living in Queens, New York than in Guyana. More Guyanese in Queens, New York than in Guyana. That's a fact. In Guyana, raw sewage runs along the waterway. There's no water, electricity. It's a terrible, terrible place. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Guyanese fled to Trinidad. Almost every house, your servant, your housekeeper, Guyanese. The tradespeople, Guyanese. We laughed at Guyanese in Trinidad and Tobago. We laughed at them. We ridiculed them. They would be returning home with plastic bags, and we'd laugh at them. Today, no one is laughing at Guyana. They have discovered some of the largest reserves of oil in the world in Guyana, and they started production last year. Guyana production will reach 1 million barrels of oil per day, in the next 5 years. A country with 600,000 people. You can imagine that wealth? Can you imagine that wealth? That a country with 600,000 people, 1 million barrels of oil per day. Guyana is now the king of the Caribbean. Our Prime Minister will go to America. He may meet the Secretary of State. The Guyana president goes to America, he meets the President of America. That tells you, you know. That tells you. Right? So in this case, Thomas versus the Freitas, this interesting lawyer who worked with the multinationals in America has now come back to Guyana, a very brilliant lawyer, and decided we shouldn't produce that oil in Guyana. We shouldn't. Because if we produce that 1 million barrels of oil per day, we will contribute to greenhouse gases in a way that they call it here, a carbon bomb. Like how you have a nuclear bomb, it's a carbon bomb. Imagine the drama. Because Guyana is a vast country. And there's huge forests. So the forest acts as a sink for carbon dioxide. So the Norwegians were paying them maybe 50 million US a year not to cut their forests. From oil, they'll make hundreds of millions of US dollars a year. So let me ask you, who would produce that oil in here after I just gave you the story? Would you produce it? Would you build roads? Would you build toilets? How do you tell them not to do that? How do you tell them keep it in the ground? And that lawyer has received an award from an English NGO for her courage, an award for the environment, and a global care. But what about the national care? That's all I'm asking. We need to debate it. We can't just talk about stopping something. We need to debate it. So, that's what I'll talk about that in a little bit more. So we go to adaptation. And adaptation are the things that you have to do to prevent the environmental consequences. Look at Uganda. In 2020, a suit was filed alleging they failed to put in place an effective machinery against landslides in Bududa district. Forgive me if I pronounce it wrong. In Bududa district. So there it is. You have increased flooding. You have gone to court and said that the government has not put things in place to deal with landslides. The government know about climate change. They know that this will happen, but they have done nothing. Why wouldn't somebody not do that in Ghana? Do you have mudslides? I don't know. Do you? You don't have that problem. You wouldn't have areas where the government should do something. You have flooding. And government can do something? It may cost. Who pays for it? You see, this is talking about taking action, effective machinery. What is meant by effective machinery? Who is paying for the effective machinery? Nobody's saying. If you want to prevent flooding in Ghana, who is going to pay for it? For that effective machinery. Here we have another case, right? This case has not been settled yet. I will not prepare. Mabazi? Do I pronounce it right or wrong? Huh? Okay, I will leave it at that for now. I will learn to speak Tree one day. This is a pending case from Kenya. Again, flooding. The petitioners assert that they are victims of climate change-related flooding, which has caused massive displacement and loss of life and property. Flooding right in Kenya. And they are this case is going on right now. And it's suing the government and saying, you have not put things in place to abate the child born. You have not bought the food and the milk to see about the baby. The baby is crying. What do? Hit the baby to slap and say, go to bed when the belly hungry? So, one of the things, and I'm going to move on. There's a lot I would have liked to say, but anyway. Right. So, you notice all these actions that were there before, these actions were against government. So climate change has taken place. We didn't cause it. We contributed less than 10% combined, Africa and the Caribbean. And we are suing our governments to mind the child. Isn't that what we're doing? So where is the government going to get the money? The government didn't tell you go and get pregnant. So where is the government going to get the money to see about you all? That's an issue. If the government imposes a tax today in Ghana, 10% tax for a fund called the Abatement Fund to invest in all these things what would be your reaction? Would you be on the streets like Nairobi? Would you storm the parliament? Young ones, would you? You, would you? How would you take it? Don't be shy. My students are also shy in Trinidad. So I'll come closer to you. Don't be shy. What would you do? Anybody here would be upset? 10% tax, increased tax, because they're going to fund abatement. Would you be upset? Yes. You all are going to graduate soon, right? And you're going to go out in the working world and just discover that 10% of your money gone. And what you'll say? I don't use greenhouse gas. I didn't do that. Why am I paying for it? So where is the government going to get the money to pay for it? They have to pay for it, right? Somebody has to pay for it. So I just will touch briefly on the legal principles. Some of the things that I have personally used and have read about where we have fought for climate justice. Many constitutions, there are constitutions now, well, we can't see too much here. In the United Nations, increasingly, there are words that say every human has a basic right. You have a right to a healthy environment. That's a basic right. A right to a healthy environment, right? In a case of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea in Trinidad, a case in which I appeared in, and I lost. And I have to say I have fought about 30 environmental cases. I've lost about 27. And it's not because I'm a poor lawyer, I think, but partly because we are arguing things that society is not yet prepared for. And a lot of our judges are not young people. They are not. They have grown up and been educated under a very colonial system. They don't understand these things, which is why you will see a lot of the protesters now being young people. And maybe us old people, we cannot understand that because our time has passed. So I argue that there's a right that you have a right to a healthy environment. How do you have a right to life in an environment that is polluted? What type of life is that? Is life just breathing? Just standing up here, walking, talking, that is life? That could never be life. Life is a sum total of our sense of security, our peace, the air we breathe, to drink water that is not polluted. That is life. I'm just smiling because I remember in Kumasi, which I really fell in love with, especially fufu. And I just loved eating that with my hands. And the guy said to me, you know, you have to eat it with your hand. I said, I may have grown up in the Caribbean, but look at my hair. I'm an Indian. We eat with hands. Our philosophy is that the flavor and the taste come from your hands. Think about that. When you put a spoon in your mouth, you put metal. So the first thing you experience with a dish is metal touching your mouth. This is your flesh touching the mouth. You see how I look, how happy I am? I tell you, I took a picture and I put it on Facebook. And I went down with my, I tell you, that was just glorious. So, in Africa, there have also been cases where they have agreed in Africa. Most cases have agreed you have a right to a healthy environment. I have lots of cases here. If people are interested after, in Uganda, South Africa, in all these areas. In some cases, like Kenya, your constitution does not say you have a right to a healthy environment, but there's a law. The Environment Act, Section 3.1 says every person in Kenya is entitled to a clean and healthy environment. Every person is entitled to a clean and healthy environment. So let me ask you a question. If there's a flood, what does a flood cause? Mosquito. Unhealthy conditions. So why can I not sue the Kenyan government and say that if you prevent the flood, then you will allow me to live in a healthy environment? And that is the way the cases are being done. The government is responsible for dealing with climate change. So there are things like right to enjoyment of property. That is in your constitution. Can you enjoy your property if it has been troubled by floods? How can you, this is in the Ghanaian constitution, has a right to enjoyment of property. Can I enjoy my property if every year my property is being flooded? So then why don't I sue you for affecting that right? Right to respect for private and family life. If every time there's a flood and I have to leave with my family and go somewhere else to live, where's my right for private and family life? If I have to run by a colleague and say, I bring my wife there, and my wife and my children must live with you, I can't have a family life. I have to behave myself in the house, right? A right not to be subjected to cruel and unusual treatment. In Europe, they have said that if you are subjected to continuous flooding, that is cruelty. If every year you have to flee your home, that is like a punishment. And in Europe, they have held that that right not to be subjected to cruel and unusual treatment affects your right to the environment. That can happen here. These cases can be easily argued in this country. So I will not bore you too much, and I'll keep, because my time is, I have about 5 more minutes. Okay. So what I have there, if anyone is interested, and I hope there's someone might be interested, I am talking there about principles where you can argue. But one thing I want to come to, intergenerational equity. Intergenerational equity, which is part of the law. It says that this generation has an obligation to future generations. That what we enjoy today, the water we drink, that is my water? Yeah, thank you. The water we drink today, we cannot drink all. We have to leave some for the unborn. It's called intergenerational equity. And the courts have recognized that. In the home, in Hindu philosophy, there's something called barakat. I don't know if you have something similar in Ghana. It might be interesting to know. Barakat means do not ever consume everything. If you always leave a little behind for the future, you will never go without. You understand that concept? So in other words, don't eat all the food one time. I went to Papaya, and I bought a dinner. And I have to say, Ghanaians have healthy appetites. That box was so filled, I could have eaten it 3 times. Yes, it is true. So I ate half, and I said, you know what? I would leave the other half. So maybe if I come late at night and I can't go anywhere, I'll have food. It happened last night. I came in very late. I was tired. And there was my papaya, waiting for me just to put in the oven, heat up, and enjoy. So that is life. This generation has a duty not to squander, take, and use everything. We need to leave something for the future. I would say that my parents, my father was a taxi driver, my mother a housewife. Typical Indian family. She was married at 14 years. She had 1 child at 15, 1 at 16, 1 at 18, and I at 21. Right? And then she said, enough is enough. Right? And my parents were not educated, and I always say how blessed I was. I was the first Trinidadian to do a doctorate in law at the University of Cambridge. That's my parents. That's not me. So what are we, would our children stand the same way and say what we did for them and what we left for them? Ask yourself that question. And think about what your parents did for you and be grateful if they did. Not all parents did. Right? Be grateful. So intergenerational equity is now a major part of the environmental struggle. And apart from the United Nations, there's a New Zealand case. The African Unity and its predecessors, they have said, look at Article 4, the parties shall adopt and implement all measures necessary to achieve the objectives of this convention. Read below, and the application of the precautionary principle. Read below, in the interest of future generations. That is not Rajendra making this up, eh? The ones who, since 1968, look at 1968, look at the last line here. Future welfare of mankind. Since 1968, African leaders have been articulating a view of intergenerational equity. My maths tells me that is about 56 years, maybe. In Latin America, we are recently, only in 2018, our leaders agreed to something like that. Only in 2018. So, in Uganda, and notice this, Uganda Foundation versus the Kingdom of the Netherlands, right? And this is an NGO who sued a Dutch NGO suing the government on behalf of future generations for what they do. Now, look at Kenya, right? It has happened here. Look at the bottom view. Constructive view of the phrase should be development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That is what a judge just said in Kenya, that whatever you do should not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. You cannot use up everything. That's a fact. And courts in Africa are beginning to articulate that view. It has happened here in South Africa, right? So this is not unknown. The next concept is what I call intragenerational equity. That was intra. Intra means between ourselves. We are found in Trinidad and Tobago. Tell me, let's be truthful. 80% of our wealth is enjoyed by 20% of the people. Is that the case in Africa? 80% of the wealth is enjoyed by 20% of the people. I am not condemning anyone. I drove last night. The traffic was horrendous. And I saw some very unusual apartment buildings opposite the Accra Mall. I don't know who owns it. But very unusual, the pattern. Some shape like this. Right? And I just imagine what it is to live there. Who owns it? Is that the case in Ghana? Would you say that is the case? That there's a small majority that enjoys the majority of the wealth. Intragenerational equity talks about sharing that wealth. I'm not talking about communism, I'm just talking about fairness. Why should 20% enjoy 80% of the wealth? Share a little bit downwards. Share a little bit downwards. Relieve the pressure and the burden on those that live amongst us. I can't help but see the poverty while I'm driving. Trinidad has a lot of poverty too, but we're only 1 million people. I must say I admire the women balancing those things on their head. It's amazing how, they walk so comfortably and they have the water on their head. boiled eggs on their head, everything there, and amazing. I see little children on the street hustling. And yes, I understand. Some of them choose to be there. And we can't cater for everything. But we need to look at intra-generational equity. How do we look after the people here? Notice again, in 1968, they spoke about rational utilization for the present. This is the African Unity, the African Convention. They, in 1968, are also concerned about rational utilization for the present. Not just the future. You cannot isolate the future and say, you know what? I will oppress the present, but I will leave something for them who come in after. You can't do that. That's selfishness. So there are, again, cases in Kenya and those places. Now, my time is coming to an end. And I would leave. So, why can't we deal with climate justice? Poverty is an important issue. Indira Gandhi said, poverty is the greatest pollutant in the case of the developing world. And I recognize his history is dubious and shrouded in infamy. But Robert Mugabe, the former president, said, preventable poverty is one of the major causes of environmental degradation today. Poverty pollutes the environment. Now, there are many things we may not quote Mr. Mugabe for, but this is a very true statement. Poverty pollutes our environment. So we have to deal with poverty. Now, I spoke earlier about the case in Guyana, where this lady is telling Guyana, leave your oil in the ground. 2 days ago I read, Namibia has just discovered oil, and Namibia is getting ready to produce oil and gas. Can you tell Namibia no? Who can rationally tell Namibia that if you produce that oil and gas, that you are going to cause greenhouse gas emissions and you are going to raise this carbon bomb? Who can go and tell Namibia that? No one. No one. My question that I'm hoping when I leave today, we will start something here today between the university. Adaptation and mitigation, I've asked the question, who pays for it? And this is where I met my esteemed colleague because he's into something called climate finance. And climate finance tries to answer who pays for it. I am a lawyer. I'm into climate justice. But there's a perfect marriage between climate justice and climate finance. Because somebody has to pay for the justice. Let's look at the cost of mitigation in Africa. There are 600 million people in Africa still with no access to power, representing 48% of the continent population. Those numbers are terrible, you know. In 2017, 48% of the continent is without electricity. 48%. The cost of Caribbean energy transition says that if we in the Caribbean have to move to renewable energy, we need 83 billion US dollars. To move away from fossil fuels, we have to get 83 billion US dollars. Who giving me that? If you're a Christian, you know in the Bible, manna fell from heaven and fed man. Now, I don't preach, so forgive me. I have never seen so many churches in my life like in Ghana, but I haven't been to Nigeria. And the names are very interesting. The Power of Christ Church, the Eternal World of this. They may have a competition on Facebook to name the church. But what I'm saying here, to give, look at this here, to bring electricity to Africa, they need 70 billion US dollars, almost on a yearly basis. 70 billion US. Who's going to pay for that? Can you sue your government then to give you electricity? That without electricity you have a right to life? Where that money is coming from? Adaptation. The Caribbean need 100 billion US dollars to adapt. 100 billion US. Let's look at Africa. Africa is even a more terrible story. Africa is saying they need 20 billion US dollars per year for the next 10 years. Look at that number, 30 billion. What's the budget of Ghana? Annual budget in US dollars. This year. 2 million? 1 trillion. That's Ghanaian dollars. And in US. $500. Okay, less than $1 billion US. So to deal with adaptation in Africa, you need $30 billion a year. That is 60 times your national budget. Who is going to pay for that? Those are questions we have to ask ourselves. We cannot hide. And that's what we are doing. We are hiding. I would leave some of those things out. Look at the reality. In our world today, the Caribbean, the world's GDP is 100 trillion. Of that 100 trillion, Africa is 94 billion, which is less than 10%. Correct? The Caribbean, less than 1%. So our income is less than 10% of the world GDP. Where are we finding that money? And go further. So climate finance, my learned colleague would say, this is the definition the developed world has given to us. It's local, national, and transnational financing drawn from public, private, and alternative sources of financing that supports mitigation and adaptation action. Those are some of the most useless words I have ever read. Leaders around the world came up with those words. Drawn from public, private, and alternative sources of financing. Anyone here could tell me what that means? It sounds nice, right? Drawn from public, private. I put it in red. I don't know what it means. There are no details to that. How are we going to draw it from private? How are we going to draw it from public? What are the alternative sources they're talking about? I don't know. With all due respect. So, I think I did right. So, there's a bank in Ghana called Republic Bank. You all familiar with it? I'm proud to say that is a Trinidad bank. Trinidad owns that bank. There's a bank in Trinidad called Republic Bank that acquired that bank in Ghana. And the first chief executive officer was a guy by the name of Robert Lee Hunt. He was the first CEO that came to Ghana from Trinidad. He returned 10 years ago to Trinidad. He got married to a Ghanaian, took her back to Trinidad, and he became a minister of government in Trinidad. He was not picked by the government to go back with the party, but he obtained a job at, I believe it would have been the IMF, where he's an executive director today. And he gave his speech last week. And I think it's interesting because it continues what I consider to be the foolishness in dealing with climate change. The Caribbean faces approximately 10.5 billion in annual economic losses. And these are his words. We need the active participation of the private sector, financial institutions, and investors. We need concessional and long-term. Yes, you need it. But how are you getting it? They continue to write words that in my mind have no meaning. We need to say something. So I have been thinking about this and coming to Ghana, and I will take 5 more minutes. Forgive me. But coming to Ghana, I thought about slavery a lot. Because I've written on slavery as a newspaper columnist in Trinidad about 2 years ago. And there's a whole debate in the Caribbean about reparation. That's a big debate in Trinidad and Tobago. Reparation. The University of the West Indies have been at the forefront of the reparations movement. Ghana, and I visited Cape Coast, was part of the slavery. Both as a participant also. The mayor of Accra apologized a couple of years ago for the role that Ghana did play in the slave trade. This is not to diminish the responsibility of the colonial masters and their responsibility to pay reparations. But that's what we are talking about. And I find it interesting, 2 weeks ago on BBC, a study has just been produced that shows that European economies where they use slaves were not significantly assisted by slave labor. Do you understand what they're trying to do? You are now going to undermine any case for reparation by saying, hey, listen, we did not benefit a lot by slavery. So if you think we benefited, it's a little bit, we can give you a little bit. That's where they are going. So without reading anything, I decided I am going to write a definition of climate reparation. And that's what I'm going to leave you here today with. That I am hoping, now people have spoken about this elsewhere, I'm sure. Rajendra did not invent this. But Rajendra invented that definition and deliberately never read a single article or paper on that. And this says, climate reparations, and I will read it, encompass a broad and complex range of proposals and actions aimed at addressing the enduring legacies of unrestrained capitalism, which has led heavily to a reliance on fossil fuels. So this world developed because of fossil fuels. The dependency has led to a massive increase in greenhouse gas emissions, resulting in significant climate change. The concept acknowledges that the pursuit of development objectives, beginning with the industrial age around 1760 in Great Britain, over 200 years, they have been extracting fossil fuels and using it to build those economies that many of us would like to go to and live and be part of. Let's face reality. Many of us would entertain the dream of going to these countries. Why? Because they have developed in a way that you want to live. But they did that on the basis of fossil fuels for over 200 years. The unrestrained use of fossil fuel by a minority of nations has inflicted profound economic and social harm on much of humanity. What they have done harms us the most. And they have the money to fix it. They have the money to adapt. Holland, which is one of the lowest countries in Europe, Holland is basically reclaimed land. Holland has no fear of climate change because they have already made steps to adapt. So they're okay. It could rise by 3 feet, 4 feet. We're okay. What about us here? Climate reparations can take various forms, including funding for adaptation measures. In other words, I am saying we need to adapt. A fund needs to be established. How are we going to do it? Here I have the quote from Nat. I will pronounce his name wrong, so I'm not going to try to say it. Nat, there is willful amnesia about the roles that we played in the slave trade in 2006. Now, there's something I want to show you here. In 1827, Joseph Fourier wondered why Earth's average temperature is approximately 15%. And in 1827, this man figured out greenhouse gases. So this is not something that they could say we never knew, 1827. Look at this here. In 1856, Eunice Newton Foote. And in 1896, we got the first prediction about global warming due to the emission of carbon dioxide. In 1896, 128 years ago, the developed world knew. This guy won the Nobel Prize Award for that. We gave a Nobel Prize Award for chemistry in 1896 to a man who predicted global warming and did nothing about it. Why? Because we're busy developing. burning fossil fuel. So I am asking, and this is just my thought now, my learned colleague and others will now take it elsewhere if they agree. I am saying there should be a reparations fund, and countries, there should be a tax imposed on all developed countries and every single citizen in the developed world that must be paid into this fund. That tax must be paid. And that fund will do two things. It will pay for adaptation. And if you don't want Namibia to produce their oil, you will give them the means to provide electricity for their people. If you don't want that, you need to pay for that, not Namibia. This is just an outline, but this is my thoughts, and I'm hoping that we can take it from there and start to do the research to show exactly how the developed world benefited from using fossil fuel over the last 200 years. Before they do like they did with slavery, and they did the study now to show that, you know what, the British economy did not really benefit too much from the use of slave labor. So if we allow them to do the work, they will produce a study that justifies it. We need to do the hard work. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
A lot of questions. Mitigation, adaptation, they all come at a cost. Are you ready to pay little for that? I know a lot of things are running through your minds and you want answers to. So we are going to be given an opportunity to ask questions, and then let Professor do justice to that. So you can raise your hand if you have any question to ask. All right, so Dr. Koto, last question.
Right, so Prof, I'll start with the first question. But first of all, thanks for the presentation. And I'll start by saying that you've tried papaya, and I hope Doc takes you to have Ghanaian jollof, since you'll be going to Nairobi and the rest, and you'll be hearing of Nigerian jollof. That's on the lighter side. Prof, I couched my question, it was actually 17 sentence-based questions, but then as you kept giving your presentations, my questions, were reduced. I'm a trained petroleum engineer, and I agreed with you, essentially on everything you said, especially when you mentioned Guyana, where you posed the question to us that should Guyana produce oil or not. Then I thought to myself, the president of Guyana was interviewed, and he said, look, the Western world developed their economies with oil. It's now our turn to produce oil, telling us not to produce. Fine, pay reparations. And you rightly mentioned it in the last part. But this is the case where our governments are, for want of a better word, we are gagged. They could start the drive for reparations, climate finance discussions will come on, our leaders go out there, and we are virtually beggars. In your experienced view as a lawyer, what should be the advice to our government? How should we approach this discussion? I schooled in Poland, and in Krakow, and Prof, you are well aware that they produce a lot of energy out of coal. On campus, the Polish mining company, was able to invest in technology that sucked out, greenhouse gases from around campus. They call it a microclimate checker. And I'm told that the whole project costed about $60 million, and it was actually installed within some few months. We don't have that money. We have oil. Our people are poor. We need to develop our oil resources. Should we invest in a technology called carbon capture and sequestration? How do we approach the international world to ensure that reparations doesn't become a rhetoric by a reality? Thank you, Prof.
Of course, the easy answer is I don't know. But it is what you have said is so correct. You cannot forego it. My background actually, my first job as an attorney was in the oil industry. I spent the first 10 years working as an oil lawyer. Energy law was my first expertise. I went accidentally into environmental law. And I don't think I would have told my company not to produce. The question again is, if we are moving towards renewables, who pays for that? I don't know if this is true, but I saw last week Ghana announced the largest floating platform in the world for solar energy. Is that correct? I saw it, the largest platform in the world of solar panels, floating. It was on BBC, right? I don't know who paid for that. And that is probably just cosmetic also. But the reality of it is, how do we get our leaders to put climate reparations as a burning issue, something on the front burner that the developing world nations will band around and say, listen, enough talk. When the President of America walked out of the UNGA and left early, all other leaders remained there. Why didn't they all stand up and boo him for walking out and listening to a developing world leader? But we accept it. I don't know if this is the right thing. I am a little bit strange enough. You know, I'll tell you this. I lecture around the world, and I feel honored to be here. And the only place I've never been honored is at my own university. And that is because I call it as it is. I do not conform. I have never been a conformist, so I am not a good one for administration because I call wrong, wrong, and right, right. Too often we conform to achieve power, to achieve position, we conform. And I think as leaders, we need to stop conforming. Why did the Kenyan President, revoke the tax when there were protests? You didn't see before that it would hurt people? You weren't listening to everything before? So I think you all need, it's up to us. We cannot expect them to be consistent in demanding climate reparations if we are not there behind them, making it an issue and making the political future lie on that issue. The young people in Trinidad and Tobago are becoming very politically, the word I want to use is apathetic. They don't seem to care. You have an election coming up here, right? President. I see so many billboards. And I ask, so many candidates, oh, he's going to lose. Nana, so he's going to lose. He's wasting his money. What do you mean he's wasting his money? Those big billboards. We have two parties. I will not talk anymore. But we have two parties. Is that true? Maybe it is. Because people feel comfortable knowing that we'll either step in this house or that house. And we are scared of going in any other house. So how do we get our leaders? The answer maybe we all need to figure this out. When do we make climate justice and climate reparation an electoral issue? When do we make the flooding and all these things an issue? I asked my driver yesterday. I was going through this road to Cape Coast, and they were digging up this road. You all have seen it, right? It's a mess. And I said to him, if a man stands up and tells you, elect me as the president of Ghana, and I promise you in 4 years I will finish that road. And if I don't finish it, I will give you a gun, bend my head and tell you, kill me. Would you vote for him? He said yes. Because we are accustomed to being promised things. So we need to move beyond that. I'm not advocating revolution or anything. I am just saying that we need to make this our issue now. And we need to do the work to prove it. I can stand up here and talk. But myself, my colleague, your students, we need to make projects. We need to show yourself what is the cost of moving to renewables. What is the exact cost of foregoing oil and gas? What is the exact cost of mitigation measures to reduce the carbon footprint when we produce that? Where are all these costs? And once we know these costs, you need to find it, somebody needs to pay for it.
As a sign of appreciation, I call on Dr. Boachi to make a presentation to Professor Ramlogan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peglo, and we are so grateful for the insightful presentation by Professor Ramlogan. And I think that we've learned a thing or two, and this is the beginning of a long-term collaboration that the University of Professional Studies is establishing with the University of the West Indies. And we are hoping that we'll have a lot of exchange programs where our students will go to Trinidad and Tobago or your Jamaican campus or your other campuses around, and we have your students here as well. I think, was it last month, I read about a giant Jamaican gallowop that was repatriated through the repatriation with the University of Glasgow. And the giant gallowop is a special species of a lizard that is extinct, and it has been in the University of Glasgow for about 170 years. And there's a whole celebration. I don't know that you follow that story, in your campus in Jamaica, and it shows the concern that the University of the West Indies has for climate issues, and if we don't take important steps, well, most species will extinct. That in the next 50 years, we will find it difficult to describe a butterfly to our children, just like we can hardly believe that once upon a time there were dinosaurs living on Earth. We can't relate to it because that type of species, they have extinct. And I read that 1 out of every 6 deaths can be attributed to air pollution. The issue of climate change is very, very important, and we don't have to joke with it. And if we realize at the beginning of the year, most part of Accra had a mist type of air, and there's a company called the Clean Air Fund. They measure the quality of air, and Accra was one of the countries with the worst air quality across the world due to pollution. So what we are discussing is not so high. It is something that we live with. And if you go to Agbogroshi, those of us who know, it's a part in the center of Accra. It is the world's most toxic e-waste in the whole world. In Accra, we have that's why you don't intend to live in Accra. The most toxic place on earth in terms of e-waste is Agbogroshi. What it means is that the things that we talk about in the conversation is closer and is nearer to us, that we have to take it serious. In the whole of Ghana, Volta region has the best air quality. The Volta region, not even Ashanti region, And if 1 out of 6 deaths is attributed to air pollution, then we have to take the issue serious. And we thank Professor Rajendra Ramlogan for such an insightful conversation. And we want to give you a round of applause one more time. So in the honor of your remarkable presentation, the faculty led by our Dean, Professor Isaac Bodi, would want to make a presentation to you. Shall we receive the Dean of the faculty? And I want to read what has been nicely crafted. if we can capture it. Faculty of Accounting and Finance and University of the West Indies. Professor Rajendra Ramlogan, a champion of climate justice and global cooperation. As you are thinking about Africa and the Caribbean cooperation, we see you as an icon that you will be able to bring the world together in a certain way. And I like your definition on climate repatriation. I think you are the first to have actually give a concrete definition to this. We proudly recognize and appreciate the outstanding contribution of Professor Rajendra Ramlogan, a distinguished scholar and a dedicated educator. Your unwavering commitment to academic excellence, innovative research, and mentorship has inspired generations of students and colleagues alike. Your tireless effort to forge the Caribbean and African Alliance on Climate Justice, promoting equitable solutions and global cooperation, have made a significant impact on our collective quest for a sustainable future. Your legacy will continue to inspire and motivate future scholars and leaders to strive for a more just and resilient world. Our heartfelt appreciation to Professor Ramlogan for your in-depth knowledge, expertise, and experience shared during the Faculty of Accounting and Finance Guest Lecture Series at UPSA, Ghana. Let's give a round of applause. Prof. So we will turn it this way. Yes.
Soon, we are almost done with this program. We can all attest to the fact that it has been a fulfilling interaction with Professor Ramlogan, and I appreciate it. I call on Dr. Philomena Dazi to give us vote of thanks. The Reverend Maswell Yeboah will give us a closing prayer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we first want to thank the Almighty for a beautiful weather. I think we've all enjoyed the ambience of the weather. We want to also thank management of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance for putting such a beautiful program together. Now we want to thank Professor Ramlogan for such an exposition. In fact, I've learned a lot from just the few minutes that he shared with us. And for all the faculty members who were present and who have stayed till the end, you see the way we were all glued to our seat because it was so interesting. So we want to thank all faculty members. And then we also want to thank you for making it possible. So let's clap for ourselves for being here. So on behalf of the team who put the whole program together, on behalf of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance, we want to say thank you very much for being here for us. Thank you.